Hello, we'd like to review the QuickLaunch implementation approaches and architecture review for preferred strategies. What QuickLaunch is an accelerator that helps JD Edwards customers get better access to the information that's entered into JD Edwards and sitting in the JD Edwards environment. So basically what we're doing is we are translating and transforming JD Edwards data from its cryptic structure into a more business-friendly format that's designed for better analytics, visualization, predictive analysis, and so on. So if we go and just walk through a few slides here. First is, what are we doing? So at the data level in JD Edwards, there's about 4,000 tables in the ERP, about 80,000 fields. We cover 15 modules of JD Edwards as part of our QuickLaunch, and of those 15 modules, we're only really touching about 150 some odd tables from the JD Edwards full set of a database there. We're translating tables from like FO101 to address or MCMCU as a field name to business unit. The dates in JD Edwards are stored in a Julian format. We translate those into Gregorian dates. The decimal precision, all the amounts and units and quantities in JD Edwards are stored without decimal places. We provide the right precision for that. The other thing that's very unique about our solution is when you get into later on seeing a live demonstration, you'll see a lot of time-based measures, month to date, quarter to date, year to date, inception to date. And a lot of companies run on different fiscal calendars. So some might run on a 445 or 544. Some might have 10 different companies within the organization all on different calendars. So we read the customer's fiscal date patterns table in JD Edwards, and we turn that data into a nice format for you to be able to slice and dice those type of time-based measures across all those different calendars, and you can restate data from one to another literally with a click of a button. So that's one of the more complicated things to do in BI. That's part of our out-of-box with QuickLaunch. We also have subledgers where each JD Edwards has different locations where the subledgers are defined. We cover those as well as we rename all the category codes. So in each of the different master tables or dimension type tables in JD Edwards where there's a lot of custom user-defined codes, we rename those based on your data dictionary or whatever you'd like to override what's in your data dictionary. So what we're doing here is just translating the data, right? So at the data level, we're able to kind of get that data and turning into a much better format for BI. There's three different approaches that we're going to review. The first we call our Direct Connect. The second would be the Operational Data Store. The third is our Enterprise Data Warehouse. So JD Edwards, translating to a best format, the way we do that with our Direct Connect is through a set of database views. And these database views can get layered right on top of JD Edwards data on SQL, on Oracle, or DB2 database backend. And those views then would be, again, where we're doing the translation. Operational Data Store is kind of maybe a little bit less impact potentially in that we're going to just mirror JD Edwards or replicate JD Edwards data to another database, and then we put the views on top of that. And then the third option is the Enterprise Data Warehouse, where we have a full-fledged star schema data warehouse. If there's any data warehousing people that are watching this, we follow kind of a Ralph Kimball type star schema model and methodology with all the best practices around, surrogate keys and conform dimensions and so on. So those are the three different types of approaches that we have for QuickLaunch. But we wanted to, that in itself doesn't solve the challenges. So what we're doing here is you pick which approach. Do you want to layer everything right over JD Edwards transaction data? Do you want to mirror JD Edwards data to another database and have that be your dedicated repository for BI? Or do you want a data warehouse? Any of those options, the output of what you get is the same with our QuickLaunch. So we, regardless of Direct Connect or data warehouse, we name all the fields. We have the same logic and the same kind of calculations going on at the data level. But in the middle here, you can see number 2, step 2, we're called data modeling. So step 1 would really be the data preparation, pick your approach. The data model is really the crux to the success in end user adoption that we deliver customers with QuickLaunch. And the reason for that is that the data model, we're using Microsoft's in-memory data modeling technology of SQL Server Analysis Services Tabular. Some of you might have heard of analysis services before. A lot of companies have used it for years, more in a multidimensional OLAP type fashion, which used to be the default setup for analysis services. Now it's tabular. So tabular is a new futuristic in-memory. That's the technology that we've built our QuickLaunch modeling on. And we can enforce JD Edwards row security. We can enforce security outside JD Edwards. Not all of our customers that want to use BI over JD Edwards have everybody that has a JD Edwards log on. So sometimes we can secure based on people that, like executives, might not log into JD Edwards. They might still only want to be able to see their division's worth of information as well. In the data model, we've got what are called perspectives, which is really for each subject area. So we bring into one data model, consider it like a cube, an in-memory cube that has a list of objects available for general ledger analysis or for sales. Those are called perspectives. So when we connect to the cube, you get these options. So I want to build a sales report or a purchasing report or an accounts payable report, HR, payroll, and so on. So you kind of pick those perspectives, and then it has already everything defined for you that you might need to drag and drop into the canvas and build your report. So there's hundreds of relationships there. We've got thousands of measures and KPIs from, you know, standard gross profit, percent. Now, and that's nice about the data model is that you can define for your business what is gross profit, and that metadata can be not only presented to users so they can mouse over a field and say, okay, this is how it's being calculated, but also everybody, regardless of what they're using to pull from that data model, what reporting tool, it's going to return the same result, okay? And so we also have other KPIs in things like on the financial side for controllers or CFOs, things like current ratio, quick ratio, inventory turns, accounts, you know, AR turnover, days receivables, and so on. So that's what's happening in the data model. And then on the right, we have data delivery where we've got some out-of-box reports that already have reports and dashboards that represent this JD Edwards data in Power BI. You know, so you'll have something that's usable right out of the gate. We also have Excel templates that to kind of showcase all the way to utilize the measures and modeling that's there. And for income statements and balance sheets, we use reporting services reports. Now, all of these things, Excel, Power BI, reporting services, or even if you're using, let's say, Tableau, for example, can pull from our tabular model as the source. So that becomes, the tabular, the data model becomes your governed source of truth for all analytics and BI. So again, at a little more deeper dive, what does this look like in a direct connect? So if you're running JD Edwards, an Oracle, DB2, or SQL Server backend, well, again, we put our views right on top of that, and we load the cube, our data model from that. And that data model can be refreshed on whatever interval you choose. That could be, let's say, most commonly customers say, well, we just need it daily. That's fine. Some customers say, well, we'd like to run this hourly. Once we determine how long your cube takes to refresh, we can determine what interval we can refresh that on. And we've got customers that are pushing hundreds of millions of rows into this in-memory data model, and the performance is very good. We also have the ability to refresh parts of the data model on demand. So if you have, let's say, a controller in month-end close, post a journal entry, and want to get a response right away without having to wait to the next hour or the next refresh cycle, you can give that person the ability to hit a button, and it'll go ahead and refresh maybe the GL pieces of the data model. So they post a journal entry in JD Edwards within a few minutes. Now they've got all that data in the memory cube, and now they can kind of slice and dice all that data to kind of get help through their month-end process. We actually have this separated here. With part of this, our data preparation, data modeling, which is the data model of the cube, and then the data delivery. So Excel, Power BI desktop, reporting services connect from that cube. And then when you want to push that data out to consumers, you have a few different ways you can do that. One, from Power BI desktop, you can push it to their cloud service. The way that that gets connected is what's called the gateway. And so all of your data, your JD Edwards could be on-premise, your cube could be on-premise, You'd be running Power BI Desktop on-premise, but you could publish to the cloud. And it's still interacting with all this data that's sitting on-premise, because every time you're in the cloud with the Power BI Cloud Service and interacting with your reports, every click that you do is a query request pass back to the data model that might be on-premise and back. Reporting services reports can be pushed to either Power BI Report Server or reporting services. There's a couple licensing, constraints there depending upon what you can do. So as far as the architecture goes for hardware at this stage, so if in a direct connect, we're putting our database views, they're just natural SQL type views sitting on the natural database for JD Edwards, or Oracle DB2 or SQL. The data modeling there where we have the cube analysis services, that will run on, we call that like a BI server. So you're going to need SQL Server Enterprise to be able to have different perspectives. There's also an ability with the SQL Server Enterprise for the data modeling to have what are called partitions. So what's nice about partitioning in analysis services is that you can load, let's say, 10 years of data into your data model, but 9 years of that data is static, right? You're not changing data from 8 years ago right now, so you can partition it. Say, okay, load all the data into the model, and then only run the current year's partition on an ongoing basis, right? So you can then dynamically have that controlled. So that perspective allows us to have one cube that has different subject areas available in it and partitioning, and then also there aren't any size limitations with Enterprise. Okay. When it comes to reports, Power BI Report Server, it's an on-premise way to share with consumers Power BI reports that's fairly economical. You can run Power BI Report Server if you have Power BI Premium, or you're running SQL Server Enterprise with software assurance. We can take that offline and follow up more detail about that. But that's basically the details there. We use reporting services here in the data delivery section really for our income statements and balance sheets in their natural format. So you can, on the web, we can have a P&L or balance sheet and drill down through the layers, so I can see from a consolidated roll-up for assets, current assets down, click on inventory to the account, and I can drill down the account down to the GL transactions there. That's what we're doing with reporting services. Everything else, the strong majority of use cases are really around Power BI and Excel, because there's still a lot of people that want to be able to, in a governed way, use Excel and dynamic pivot tables from the data model itself. Next, we have the ODS. So now we can see a few more icons on this screen. Keep in mind that everything I've talked about and everything really from the data modeling to the right is the same as what I've just talked about before. However, I did forget to mention a few things as we are getting more and more customers that don't want to run everything on premise, but how these could live in the cloud as well. So you can run within Azure, most commonly customers that are standardizing on Microsoft and Power BI as their go-to and have Office 365. Azure might make more sense than some other options, but we're agnostic to the different clouds. So if you have your own data in your own hosted cloud or AWS, I mean, we're agnostic to that. But in Azure, they have a few other options. You can run a VM in Azure that has SQL Server on it that can run analysis services. You can, depending on how you scale that, you can have one server running analysis services, a separate server running maybe reporting services, or Power BI Report Server, or if you scale it, you can have them maybe potentially both being on one. Rule of thumb typically is if budget's not a factor, putting things on different database or different server environments is always best practice. However, it doesn't always make sense from a standpoint of, that gets expensive, and sometimes we have to license several boxes of SQL Server Enterprise. So, but there's also within the data modeling, there's inside of Azure, something called Azure Analysis Services, which is in essence a cube as a service. So you can even push your data out there to an Azure database and then have your cube running as a service out there that you can still connect to from on-premise data sources as well. So long-winded addition to data modeling, data delivery here in the ODS section. On the data preparation side, the difference here is with an ODS, we're not loading our cube directly from JD Edwards transaction data. In this example, we are going into, and if you're on JD Edwards on SQL Server, we've built out using SQL Server integration services, another capability within the SQL Server licensing suite, the ability to do near-time replication of data from SQL into an ODS. If you're using SQL replication today, that's maybe one option, or high availability. What we're doing with ours is, because of the way we've constructed it, we can then optimize that copy of the data with additional indexes and changing data types without having to go back to the source system of JD Edwards and make changes there. So that's one advantage there. We can kind of take that again offline. But the idea here with the ODS is we're mirroring the data, and so you're getting maybe within a minute or two, you'll have your data hits JD Edwards, and now it's just mirrored to this copy, and then we put our views on top of that copy. Right? You can, and we're agnostic because we support the 3 database types, SQL Server, Oracle, and DB2. You, in theory, could have your ODS in any of those 3 versions of the different database types. Most customers are replicating to SQL. So, if, SQL to SQL, we have our packages that do that. If you're running on Oracle or DB2, we use third-party replication software to grab the data from JD Edwards and mirror that into the ODS and go cross-database platforms. So we might be pulling from in the Oracle, be pulling from the logs and trickle feeding that data into a copy, let's say, on SQL Server. The first pass will be a full load, and now you're running incremental and then loading things, again, every couple minutes. Same thing from DB2. With DB2, the replication software would be pulling from the journals on the iSeries and then loading the ODS from that. Again, we put our views on top of that, load our tabular model, and everything to the right is the same. Our ODS cube and all the reports and everything and all the logic and all the measures and calculations in the ODS approach is the same as the direct connect. So the business users or consumers that are accessing this data with QuickLaunch in an ODS approach aren't going to really know the difference, that it's not going to look any different than if they're doing this direct connect. The only difference, again, is we're mirroring data off. So we're not, as we're loading the cube, let's say every hour, you're not getting queries hitting the transaction system. You're getting data just being replicated from JD Edwards ongoing. So when those hourly loads run to the cube, it's now hitting a separate database of the ODS instead of JD Edwards transaction data. That's the primary difference there. And lastly here on the enterprise data warehouse, again, if you're JD Edwards on SQL Server, we do have a set of SQL Server integration services. That is the ETL tool that we're using for our data warehouse. And we can go straight from JD Edwards on SQL to the Star Schema data warehouse. We call that EDW, or Enterprise Data Warehouse, that can be running on-premise. We can also run that directly to the Azure. If you're running on JD Edwards on Oracle or DB2, we do need to stage the data in SQL before we can get it to our data warehouse. So for customers that want to go more of a cloud route, like in, let's say, Azure as an example, they would use third-party replication software to pull from the logs or journals on JD Edwards, and then that would land in a database out there in Azure, maybe an Azure SQL database. And then we pull from that to load another database in Azure called EDW, and then the cube out there as well. If you're going to run a VM in Azure, then you could have kind of all those running on the VM instead of at the database level themselves. So that's an example there. Same thing with the ODS. You could have your ODS be in the cloud. So you can be running JD Edwards on-premise, and our ODS, we're just mirroring that data to a location, let's say an Azure SQL DB, or a VM in Azure that might be running SQL Server on it, as an example. So with our EDW, we do change because, as I mentioned before, we follow a lot of the best practices with what are called surrogate keys. We create a new convention for relationships between tables in our data warehouse. So a surrogate key is a numerical key. So every table would be relating on a numerical key. We also create called unknown members. So we get one value in each dimension and fact table in the warehouse. So everything can be related on inner joins. But without getting too deep into the weeds there, in essence, the data warehouse, some customers reach out to us wanting a data warehouse because we're following all best practices and we can get this up and running very quickly. It's very desirable. But we're finding that most companies that might traditionally have needed a data warehouse nowadays are doing either Direct Connect or ODS because the tabular model, the data model in the middle, is the same, and that's really becomes a virtual data warehouse in memory. So 50% of our customers go Direct Connect, 25% go with an ODS, 25% go with a data warehouse. And we'd be happy to take any further questions that you might have there. Again, I have been bouncing around a little bit. Keep in mind, again, all this can run on-premise. We can have a hybrid of things running on-premise or in the cloud. Even from approaches, you might have some things where you need, okay, we've got 3 different CRMs, a couple different ERPs. For financials and sales, we might need a data warehouse. But for some of the other things, I just want to run some purchasing information on top of JD Edwards. Some of these might work in a Direct Connect. So you can do a hybrid approach as well. We haven't really described that much, but really it's just taking these methodologies and kind of running them side by side. So we have what we call the road to success, and these different architecture implementation approaches that we reviewed, Direct Connect, ODS, or Data Warehouse, really in themselves, we feel like get you about 40 to 50% of the way down the path of success, the road of success. The tabular model is where we feel like it's the biggest contributor to your end user adoption and satisfaction and your simplicity for the users, right? Because of all the work, the time-based measures, the KPIs, the relationships already defined, right? Just because you create a data warehouse, if your user has to start their analysis by connecting to a data warehouse and figure out which tables do I need to build a sales report, not necessarily making it easier for the users, but the tabular model, when I connect to the tabular model, say, oh, I want to build a sales report. Maybe I should grab the sales perspective, and it's already got all that there. That's how simple we make it with all the measures on top of that. And then with our sample Power BI reports, we figure, you get 75% of the way down the road of success when you take the back end and the tabular model. We add another 10 or 15% for the out-of-box reports because it is nice for people to be able to have something right out of the gate that they can showcase to their users. This is very with Power BI, what's referred to as modern BI, business user-driven analysis instead of IT-driven or IT-centric type analysis. And so for a lot of people, this is very new territory. So it's really nice having functional, usable reports. We map them over your data as part of the setup. You can completely change them in and out, change your slicers, change your visuals, change what your hierarchies are for drillability and so on. And so with that, we figure that adds another 10 or 15%. So we're not selling QuickLaunch as a 100% solution. It's intended to be a jumpstart, an accelerator. We do also encourage customers because a lot of people have other data, right? Very few of our customers only focusing around JD Edwards only. And so for those customers, we want to be able to provide a methodology that you can grow from. So that's really what we're selling with QuickLaunch is not only this ability to get something in a matter of weeks, which would take months or years and several of those to get something, but also have a foundation. So when you want to pull other data and still have it be, oh, we still have these other data outside of JD Edwards that we need to calculate some of these measures on a year-to-date basis, and we're a fiscal, 544 calendar, we've already got that logic there, and you can leverage that for all these other systems. And that's the beauty of QuickLaunch. The last thing about the implementation timeline is, there's been, talking now for several minutes about these different flavors and options. We've spent thousands of hours, and it's taken decades of knowledge to come up with what's required to build this type of solution. And so we spent those thousands of hours so you don't have to. We really get things up and running in a matter of days, and then really kind of call it fully configured in a matter of weeks. So in a direct connect, we typically would schedule 4 weekly status calls on the implementation. And there's a lot of things, because inside of there with those thousands of measures, things like revenue and gross profit, net income, the different calendars, the hierarchies for the financial reports, right? So what is your breakdown of your P&L and balance sheet? Are you doing it by category code or level of detail or account ranges? Do you want to manage that in JD Edwards, or do you want to manage that in a spreadsheet? Lots of different choices that need to be made. And so really what we find is that a direct connect solution, this could be not just one module, 4 weeks per module. It's 4 weeks for 10 modules or 8 modules or 11 modules, whatever you want to implement. And then the data warehouse, we add a couple weeks to that. The data warehouse has more layers. So we have to set up some of depending upon if your database backend, again, is Oracle or DB2, we've got to stage the data in SQL, and then we've got to load up the data warehouse and the tables there. And then we still have the tabular model and all the reports and everything else. So we add a couple weeks on the data warehouse. So probably about 4 weeks for Direct Connect, about 6 weeks, again, depending upon what you're looking to do with the data warehouse. You might need to add a couple weeks there as well. And so that's in a nutshell kind of some architecture options. We love to connect with you further, and if you have any questions, we're here. Thanks again.